Samantha marched up the driveway, a large metal pipe slung over her shoulder like she was some sort of self-appointed neighborhood enforcer. Her cheeks were flushed, possibly from the heat or her fury, likely both. I could hear her shouting something about unauthorized changes to my property, but honestly, the exact words didn't matter. What mattered was the pipe in her hand. Last time I checked, the neighborhood watch didn't issue weapons, unless this was some bizarre attempt at a personal vendetta. I stepped out onto my porch, casually leaning against the railing, one hand tucked in my pocket. My eyes scanned her figure before landing on the pipe. She was visibly tense, as if the weapon was giving her some misplaced sense of authority. I raised an eyebrow and looked her over with a sarcastic smirk. "A pipe from my driveway, really?" I called out, my voice dripping with mockery. "I've heard complaints about my lawn before, but this is a first. You planning on beating me over parking space next?" Samantha's face reddened, her grip tightening on the pipe. "You think this is funny?" Her voice cracked with tension. "I'm not joking. I'm here to enforce the community rules, and you've broken them. Big time." I chuckled dryly, stepping down the porch steps toward her. "Oh, I'm sure I made a mistake, but the real blunder is you thinking you can just waltz onto my property, wielding a weapon like some kind of enforcer." Her chest puffed up with a self-righteous arrogance. "You've been breaking the neighborhood guidelines for months. You made changes to your house without approval. That's against the rules, and I'm here to put an end to it." I glanced around, my eyes landing on the house she was so concerned about. It was a modest, well-kept home with a bit of wild landscaping, a far cry from what she seemed to deem an eyesore. But that didn't matter to Samantha. She had an issue to resolve, and she had no problem using force to do it. "You know, it's cute you think a lawnmower solves every problem," I said, my voice deadpan. "But let me ask you, Samantha, what gives you the right to show up here with a weapon? Did I miss the memo where the neighborhood association became a militia?" Samantha didn't even flinch. She kept ranting, repeating the usual HOA nonsense. "The association has the right to enforce the rules, and if you think you can ignore them, you're wrong. You'll be fined, and if you don't comply, I'll make sure they kick you out of here." I crossed my arms, biting back a grin. She sounded convincing, but it was clear she had no clue who she was dealing with. I stood there, letting the silence stretch between us as she fidgeted, probably thinking she had the upper hand. Finally, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my badge, holding it up for her to see. "You might want to rethink that pipe, Samantha," I said, my voice cold. "You're talking to the sheriff." For a split second, her face went blank, as if the words couldn't register. Then it clicked. Her eyes widened, and her expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear. "Well, what? You're the sheriff? You're just some guy from this little town." I raised an eyebrow, giving her an exaggerated once-over. "Just some guy, huh? How do you think I got this badge? Been the sheriff around here for, what, 6 years now? Guess I must have slipped under your radar." The pipe lowered slightly in her hands as the realization hit her. She had no idea who she was dealing with, and that made this whole situation much more entertaining. Let me give you some context here. Samantha had been a thorn in my side for months, always finding something to complain about. First, it was my fence, then it was the tree, then, because she couldn't help herself, my perfectly normal SUV. Apparently, my Jeep wasn't appropriate for the neighborhood. But I knew what she didn't. I was always a step ahead. Samantha didn't know it yet, but I had already been dealing with her behind the scenes. You know how she'd been borrowing water from my private well for her garden? Cute. At first, I let it slide. But when she called me about my unsightly yard for the 5th time, I'd had enough. So what did I do? I gave her irrigation system a little surprise. Sewage. Yep, sewage. I couldn't help but grin thinking about it. Samantha had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. She thought she was some untouchable HOA officer, but I had her number, and I wasn't afraid to use it. Now, standing there with the pipe drooping in her hands, Samantha realized she was way out of her league. She wasn't in control anymore, and for once I could enjoy watching her try to figure out how to save face. "I think it's time you leave, Samantha," I said, my voice growing colder, "before this gets worse for you. Believe me, you don't want to test me." Her face drained of color. She was about to protest when the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. It was backup, but Samantha had no clue. She just stood there, frozen, still trying to figure out how this was happening. She probably thought I had some magic trick up my sleeve. As the sirens grew louder, I stepped toward her, my posture casual but confident. You don't want to make this any harder than it already is. Trust me. She blinked, flustered, her mouth opening and closing as she scrambled for some sort of retort. This is my neighborhood too, she finally shouted. I'm just doing what's right. I tilted my head, the sarcasm thick in my voice. What? You mean making up rules in your head? Last time I checked, showing up at someone's home with a weapon wasn't in the guidelines. And as for the HOA having its own private army, well, newsflash, Samantha, it doesn't. Her grip on the pipe tightened, but it was clear she didn't know what to do with it now. Her sense of power was slipping through her fingers. You don't scare me, she spat, though it was hard to ignore the tremor in her voice. I'll make sure you regret this. The HOA will have you removed. I'll make sure of it. I raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch between us. The HOA? You don't even know what they've been up to, do you, Samantha? Because I do. That stopped her dead in her tracks. The anger drained from her face as she tried to process what I had just said. I've been investigating the HOA for months now. I know about your little schemes, the fines you've been illegally handing out, the extortion. I also know you've been tapping into my water supply for your precious garden. That's not just against the rules, it's illegal. For the first time, Samantha wasn't the one calling the shots. She wasn't the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer anymore. Now, she was the one who had to listen. She took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. You're bluffing, she muttered weakly. You can't prove any of that. You're just some sheriff in a small town. You think you can scare me. I didn't even flinch. Leaning against the railing, I crossed my arms, my posture relaxed. Scare you? No, Samantha. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just reminding you that there's a line. And you crossed it. The sirens were getting closer now, and I could tell Samantha was starting to realize that her stubbornness was about to lead her into a world of trouble. You've been causing problems for far too long, I said, my voice calm and firm. Every time you've called the HOA to complain about me, it's been one more step toward your downfall. It's over. As Samantha stood there, her eyes darting around in panic, the reality of the situation finally began to settle in. Her once confident stance had crumbled, and all the power she thought she wielded evaporated in an instant. She wasn't the enforcer of the neighborhood rules anymore. She was just a woman caught in a mess she had no idea how to clean up. The sound of sirens was now unmistakable, growing louder by the second. In the distance, I could already see the flashing lights, the cavalry arriving on time, just like I had planned. Samantha's thoughts seemed to race, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Her grip on the pipe had loosened, and her shoulders were slumped as if the weight of her own arrogance had crushed her. You should leave now, Samantha, I said again, my voice steady calm, almost as if I was talking to a child who still didn't understand the rules. You don't want to make this worse for yourself. She stood frozen, her eyes flicking between me and the approaching sirens. Her expression shifted from disbelief to fear, and for the first time since this confrontation began, she had no response. No threats, no demands. Just the cold realization that she had misjudged me. She had thought she could walk into my life and dictate the terms, but now she was learning the hard way that I wasn't someone to be bullied. You're making a huge mistake, she stammered, but there was no conviction behind the words anymore. I raised an eyebrow. No, Samantha. You made the mistake. You came here, armed, thinking your HOA rules meant anything beyond paper. Now you know how far your reach really goes. As sirens approached, I stepped closer. I'll make sure the community knows exactly who you are. It's over, Samantha. The squad car pulled up, lights flashing. Samantha's panic was clear. The officer stepped out, and I nodded. Justice was in motion. For me, it was peace. No more harassment. No more complaints. No one walking over me. Justice was in motion. For me, it was peace. No more harassment. No more complaints. No one walking over me. From now on, this neighborhood would finally know where the real line is drawn.